Green bean casserole. Why on earth would we talk about green bean casserole on a day when we're celebrating, foods from farm and nature? So, well, this is the farm side of green bean casserole. But is it a farm? I mean, it's, canned soup, canned green beans, or canned fried onions, frequently canned green beans. Okay, so, does this really represent this area and farm life? Okay, so I'm going to talk about how, yes, it does, and how even though it is kind of thought of as a joke in many regions, it is something that's very, very meaningful to a lot of people in Northwest Ohio and throughout the Midwest. So I'm not from here originally, although I've lived here now 35 years. So I don't know, does that count? But I remember when my children were little, they were all born in Toledo, but we lived in different places, and we go and visit family members and all these other places. And at one point, my daughter said, Mom, you're always studying food from these exciting places, Korea, Spain, Ireland, the Appalachian Mountains. But what about us? Don't we have anything that's exciting? So, well, the answer, according to popular culture in the U.S., is that no, you don't. Cleveland is usually pointed to as the most boring place in the U.S. Or in sitcoms, if they have to, say someone is like normal and dorky and boring, they say, oh, they're from Cleveland. I've actually seen Toledo. I know. Okay, so in defense of my children. Okay, this is, all of that is simply a cover. So green bean casserole, I'm assuming everybody is familiar with green bean casserole. Has anyone never tasted it? It's okay if you haven't. So I just, I don't want to make any assumptions. Green bean casserole is essentially a can or two of green beans. They can be frozen green beans, they can be fresh. Okay, they are mixed with a can of cream of mushroom soup, supposed to be Campbell's too, and a teaspoon of soy sauce, supposed to be Choy. So, and usually like half a cup of milk, you stir all that up, but maybe half of this, kind of depending on how much crunch you like. You put some of these fried styrofoam onions. Yeah, you mix that in, and then you bake it, and then you sprinkle these on top, and it comes out as a casserole. Okay, and it's something that it seems so easy to make, how on earth could this be something special? Okay, and I know when I moved here, I have Southern heritage. Okay, so the idea in the South, if you're going to have special food, it has to be fancied, and you have lots and lots of dishes. Okay, and the idea that you would make something, for Christmas dinner, that's just opening some cans like this, that was heretical. You would never ever do that. So I thought, well, I know a lot of people here who are very, very nice and have excellent taste, and they're very good cooks. They have a lot of skill. This isn't just a matter of Midwesterners don't have any taste, or they're lazy. They're obviously not lazy. So what is going on here? So I started looking into this more, and just trying to figure out what was going on. Okay, now part of what is fascinating about green bean casserole is that it comes from all these processed foods, industrial foods. Okay, however, a lot of people in the area talk about they have their own kitchen gardens, they grow their own food, they process their own food. So that seems like a contradiction. Why would they then want a casserole made up of all these canned things. Okay, so I was trying to figure that out. Let me tell you a little bit about the history of green bean casserole, though, because that in itself, when I started looking at the history, it was fascinating. So the Campbell Soup Company invented it in 1955 in their test kitchens in New Jersey. Okay, Dorcas O'Reilly was the name of the nutritionist, food scientist who invented it. We actually know that. So it's not a tradition because we know where it came from. However, it frequently is thought of as a tradition here, because people are making it in their families. Okay, so Campbell Soup, though, started in 1869, and they started as in New Jersey, and they would peddle soups, like homemade soups that they had made, and vegetables, and they were peddlers. They take these around New York City and New Jersey, and sell these soups. Okay, which that was the equivalent of fast food. You couldn't go to McDonald's. You'd have to wait for the peddler to come by and say, "Oh, I'm gonna buy soup today." So let me make sure. I keep hitting that. Sorry about that. So and then in 1897, condensed soup, garlic mustard. Sorry about that. So in 1897, condensed soup, or Campbell Soup, invented condensed soup. Okay, so so now they didn't have to lug these gigantic things around. And when I say lug, I literally mean lug. Because they would have peddlers who they'd have a bar and these big pots hanging down, and they'd literally walk around the street. And someone would come up and say, "Oh, I want to buy some soup." They'd take out a mug, and dip it in. They do the same thing with milk, with other things, which there were some sanitation issues there, you can imagine. So condensed soups meant that, we don't have to have a giant container full of it. Okay, plus canning. We take cans, aluminum cans, for granted now. That's something that was actually invented in France. Napoleon was pushing the invention so that his armies would have something to eat. And cans initially, were these gigantic, they're made out of steel. And, so you had to almost have an axe to open them. And, so technologies were developing, so that condensed soup could now be put into cans that could be opened a little more easily. Okay, so so there were technologies that were helping with this. Okay, and then in 1900, at the Paris exhibition, Campbell Soup. Let me see if Campbell Soup took some of their cans of condensed soup and put it on exhibition, put it into the contest. They won a gold medal. Okay, and this is the Healthy Request, the Heart Healthy version, so apparently that was not available in 1900. So, however, a lot of the cans do have that symbol, the gold medal, and that's where it comes from, 1900. Okay, so, they started being nationally known, okay, as a family-run business. Okay, and they were promoting themselves as being traditional, even though it was a business. Okay, and then in 1916 they put out a cookbook, Helps for Hostesses. Okay, and it was all about how to use their condensed soups. Okay, so so they were definitely into promoting themselves. They were shaping American food in this way too. And that's something that we really don't even think about or realize. Okay, in 1931, they came up with their slogan, good. And I remember, I have a sister who's 15 years younger than me, and she was nursing, and she was about maybe 18 months old, And she looked up from my mother during a nursing session and went, good, good. So the influence of Campbell's soup is, is very, very significant. So, and then in 1934, they actually invented the cream of mushroom soup. Okay, and then in 1955, they invented the green bean casserole. Okay, now in the 1950s, we kind of look at things like green bean casserole now as like, oh, that's so old-fashioned and lazy or whatever, But in the 1950s, there were a number of things going on, okay, that encouraged the embracing of recipes like this. Okay, so this was an era in which women were generally staying home. They were supposed to. After World War II, there was a real push for women to stay home so that the men coming back from the war could be the workers. Okay, suburbs were invented. So women working at home, preparing meals 3 times a day, was the ideal for the American middle class. So I should point out, this definitely the American middle class. The working class, was not like that. And the upper class, they had their servants doing it. Okay, so this is the rise of the American middle class. Okay, this was seen as something very modern, though. They were using technology. Okay, and the idea that, oh, it's a new recipe. So we're moving away from all the old stuff that was pre-war. It's a new America. We're all moving forward together. We're all using these new recipes that come from these companies, that do have this historical continuity, with places that are very American. What's more American than New Jersey, right? So there is this sense of uniformity. We're all in this together. We're all using technology. We're all being modern together. And housewives could show that they were modern by making green bean casserole. Okay. Completely the opposite of what we think of today, right? So, and it also, if you think about during World War II, part of what happened after and during that and after was this real sense that we're all American. We're all pulling together. Now, of course, not everybody, but that was the overall feel within popular culture and mainstream culture. So people wanted to be eating the same food as people in California. They wanted to celebrate being American by just eating these things that everybody had access to and that everybody was sharing. And this is pretty inexpensive to make. What's more all-American than something that is inexpensive enough for almost everyone to purchase, and it's available in all the supermarkets. It's not regional. So this meant that all Americans could participate in this. So it was really signaling uniformity. Okay, so that is part of the reason that it was embraced. Okay, now also though, soy sauce. In the 1955 recipe, it calls for 1 teaspoon of soy sauce. That seems very bizarre. Okay, in the mid-1950s though, there was a surge of interest in things that were Asian. Part of it, there's kind of a theory in food history that the victors always colonize other countries by taking their food. So Japanese food actually became very popular in the US, and everything Asian started being of interest. Also though, okay, this is not Choy. However, Choy was the first company in the US to start producing Asian foods. Okay, and it specifies in the recipe 1 teaspoon of Choy soy sauce. Okay, why would it do that? Okay, Choy actually started in Detroit, 1922. It was started by 2 roommates at the University of Michigan. One was from Korea, the other one was from Detroit, and his father ran a grocery store in Detroit. And they were trying to come up with something that the father could offer to produce, as distinctive. So they started offering canned bean sprouts, which usually don't taste all that good, but pretty exotic, and a major ingredient in chop suey and chow mein, okay? So, and then that was successful, so they started adding more and more things. And then, let me check the date on this. In 1942, they moved from Detroit. They moved their factory from Detroit to Archibald, Ohio. Okay, now, why on earth would they do that? Archibald was known, it was a huge area for Mexican migrant workers, and Mexicans from Texas, or Mexican Americans from Texas were coming up. So there were plenty of people to work in the factories. Okay, also, though, Archibald was being settled by Mennonites, not the old order Mennonites, who looked more like the Amish, but Mennonites who were very progressive, very internationally minded. A lot of them had been missionaries to other countries, and they were usually agricultural or educational missionaries, and they tended to be very respectful of the foods and cultures of those other countries. They'd bring them back with them. So there was actually a taste for Asian food in that area, okay? Plus, progressive Mennonites were promoting eating vegetarian food as a way to create peace, and equity in the world. So whether or not they saw green bean casserole in that way, I have no idea. But there are all these factors that made having the La Choy factory in Archibald, Ohio, make sense. Okay, now Napoleon, Ohio. Is anyone here from Napoleon? Or you've at least driven past Napoleon? And what do you see? The giant, cream, the Campbell cream of mushroom soup can, this giant can is part of the landscape there. Okay, Napoleon and Archibald are pretty close together. Okay, now I actually asked someone at the Campbell Soup Company, was there a connection between La Choy and Campbell Soup at that point? They said, probably. So I don't have the specifics, but it's very, very likely that just the proximity of these two factories. Okay, so here's something that was being added. This would have made this casserole kind of exotic, a little bit gourmet. Okay, but it doesn't really change the flavor. It just kind of adds salt. Kind of a whole different way of viewing green bean casserole. So, and then the French fried onions. Let's see, they were started. I think it was 1904. Okay, and incorporated into green bean casserole. Okay, now how does this represent food in this area? Why would people here embrace it? Okay, if anyone was in the earlier talk, I talked about how the Great Black Swamp region was settled actually very late in American history. Okay, the 1800s, 1830s was when they started draining the swamp. Okay, but even today, nature kind of has to, it has to be kept under control by farmers. When it rains, nature takes the fields back. It turns things into a swamp again. Okay, so there was always a little bit of hesitation about nature and natural foods from the wild. People wanted technology to protect themselves, to guarantee that they were going to be having food, enough food to eat. Okay, so processed food, canned foods, industrial agriculture, these were seen as ways to protect themselves against the whims of nature. Okay, which, if you're growing up on a farm and maybe not having enough to eat, that does make sense. And so here comes something that's invented by a food company, a food production company. And we'd look at this today as, oh, really good marketing. The only reason it was accepted into that, though, is that it fit into the ethos, okay, the belief system of a lot of the people in the area that, yeah, we want that processed food, okay, that can guarantee that we will have enough food to eat. Okay, also, it fit into the taste of the area. This region was settled primarily by people from British stock, so generally not straight from Great Britain, but they came to Connecticut, the Mid-Atlantic, and then came out this way. And then a lot of German farmers, okay, who were kind of chased out of other places, And so they were the ones who actually farmed and drained the swamp. This was very tedious work. And some people say, well, they were German, so they were used to that. But they also were not welcome in a lot of other places. So this was one of the few places where they could gain land, their own land. Okay, and both British and German food culture historically it makes heavy use of butter and milk and cream sauces. So, and mixing those together with vegetables, meat, and a starch. So it fit into kind of the aesthetic, the taste of the area. Okay, so, it's not something that's just kind of out of nowhere. It makes sense, that this would become a tradition. Okay, now, when I say it's a tradition, it's not like people just blindly followed the recipe. They would use their own taste, or maybe they didn't have any soy sauce. So they'd use something else, Worcestershire sauce, or just nothing, Or maybe they didn't like green beans. So they might use asparagus instead, okay? Or they don't like these, or they hadn't gotten to the store to buy some. So they could use potato chips, okay? They could use breadcrumbs. So there were all sorts of ways to vary this recipe to make it something that people considered their own. I remember one of my children came home from college and said, Mom, we have to have green bean casserole for Thanksgiving. I said, really? We've never served it at our house. I said, yeah, but Mom, we were born here, so we have to have it. So she made it completely from scratch, from organic ingredients and vegan. So she used vegan butter, soy milk, fresh green beans, fresh mushrooms, and then actually fried up all the onions. It was very, very tasty. Okay. The point of that is that we all do this with recipes, make them our own in some ways. Okay, now, I know some of you are thinking, no, we don't always do that. If you vary it, it's not the real thing. So, however, it can be the way it's served. Lots of people have a special dish just for green bean casserole, or only Aunt Susie is allowed to bring the green bean casserole. So there are all these ways that it becomes a part of tradition and reflects the identity of the people who are using it. So one of the things we are asking people to do for the Great American Recipe is to give us their variations on green bean casserole. So, thank you.